So good afternoon and welcome to this first edition of this Pharma Decrypted webinar series. I'm here today to explore the reason why your pharma content fails occasionally. And in order to discuss this, I am your host, Sabine Louët, founder of SciencePod, and I have invited our guest, Alexander Jakobson, who's the founder of CAIRO. So perhaps we should start by asking you, Alexander, could you tell us a bit about your background?
Thank you, Sabine. I'm very happy to be here with you today and discuss this important topic. So I'm Alexander Jakobson. I'm a machine learning engineer by training, so focusing on AI, as it's called now. And I spent the last few years in pharma marketing. And I'm the founder of CAIRO, and we help pharma companies measure and understand how their products are understood by AI models, such as ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, etc.
So that's a very topical issue that you're tackling here today. So I'd like to first start by giving a bit of background concerning why this matters nowadays. As a pharma executive, you are always involved in activities that are essentially to better engage healthcare professionals and patients. And the reality is that the way you engage patients nowadays has completely been disrupted by the advent of AI tools such as chatbots, but also AI overview by Google, which completely turn on their head the way the medical information is communicated online. So perhaps we could start by answering the question, what should a pharma executive's objective be when producing creative content in pharma?
Yeah, totally. So as you well said, historically, the objective when creating content has always been to create high quality content and push it through the right channels, whether it be your website, your email channels, or SMS or WhatsApp, what be it. This model has completely shifted today. The primary objective, knowing the ever-increasing usage of these AI platforms, is to ensure that AI systems understand, give visibility, and accurately represent your drug when questions are asked about your indications, about your therapeutic area, or when your drug is directly being named in the conversation. Because these AI platforms have now become the first point of contact for patients and HCPs.
And I would say the single point of contact. And so in that respect, this is becoming a challenge when you have maybe 3 or 4 competing pharma companies trying to get a word in edgeways regarding their therapy area. Because most of the time what's happening on the market is that companies in a highly regulated environment like Europe tend to publish initially some unbranded content just to attract the attention, and they reserve the branded content, more specific information about their product, to gated areas of their portal, for instance. So what can we say about the pitfalls that you should avoid when trying to engage with the HCP with content? What are the things to watch out for in this new environment?
Right. So I think what's really important to understand about this new environment is that these AI models don't rank sources like we're used to in search. These AI models generate claims about products and how treatment should be made. And so the objective really shifts from just ranking over your competitors to actually making sure that the information reaches the AI when it generates these answers. So there's a few pitfalls that we see when we measure these models. So first is just incorrect answers. The second might be omissions. That means that it partially represents your product, but doesn't actually surface the possible benefits of the product that could be a competitive advantage for you. And sometimes, obviously, misrepresents it compared to your competitors. So to give you a concrete example, we recently ran an evaluation on a targeted oncology drug that was approved by the FDA no less than 6 months ago. So it's on the market. when we tested this drug and asked for the specific indication that it was approved for, we saw that it had zero brand recognition. None of the models knew about this drug 6 months after launch.
And was it, did you target a specific geography? Because as you know, in Europe, brands are not supposed to be putting information that's readily available online. So where did you run this query?
So no matter if you run the query in Europe, in Africa and Asia, or the US, these AI models have a global representation of the drug. So it doesn't necessarily go after the local regulations, right? And where it can
That's
get
the
even
issue.
That's the issue. And where it can get even more dangerous is that in the absence of authoritative information published by the manufacturer, these AI models will always give an answer. So, for example, for this specific oncology drug, we saw that the models were actually fabricating contraindications when asked about the contraindications for this molecule, which obviously will influence perhaps prescribing behavior, but also how patients will react when searching for information about this. And the answers from these models are very variable. So you'll see, for example, when we tested this drug, that first we asked it for the name of the drug, and it said it didn't exist. And then when we insisted, it started giving dosing advice on that same drug. And this is a result of a failure in the content strategy, where before one way to control the conversation perhaps was by saying nothing and staying silent. But in this new era of AI-generated content, silence immediately gets filled, and you risk losing share of voice and actually losing the entire narrative around your product if you don't put out content that is tailored for these AI models.
So particularly, I'd like to focus on the discussion around unbranded content, because a lot of the time that's where pharma companies start for the readily available information around the therapy areas in which they have products. Can we say that essentially there could be a hidden opportunity in plain sight in detecting the gaps in knowledge that's published around specific areas, and in filling in that knowledge gap with your own content, which may be the first type of content to address, unspoken areas, or to answer questions that have not been answered by your competitors, for instance?
Yes. There's actually a new concept that has arrived with the advent of AI. Before we used to talk of share of voice. Today we can talk about share of question. And so it's very important for pharma companies to understand what questions are being asked about their specific drugs, or about from patients or HCPs in their specific therapeutic area, where content is lacking, and where the AI answers are perhaps not optimized to answer these questions. And that's actually an opportunity for these pharma companies to gain, as you say, share of question, by being the authoritative source that these AI models will use to generate answers to those questions.
Okay, so maybe this really is a nice segue into my next question, which is really about what would be the secret ingredient to successfully plan and orchestrate the way your medical content is actually represented online, and how you define what should be published.
Yeah, that's a great question, Sabine. And I changed the premise slightly because there is no one-size-fits-all recipe.
Sure.
And really, it's as much a content problem as it is a feedback problem. So the companies that are succeeding today are the ones that are able to close the loop between what questions are being asked, what the AI system answers, and how that evolves over time. Because AI doesn't wait for the content, for your content to be published. If a new question appears today, let's say a rumor, a safety concern, new interpretation data, the AI will generate an answer instantly. It won't say, "Oh, we're waiting for the manufacturer to publish guidance next quarter.
For sure. And this is really an important aspect of strategy in terms of the need to plan and also to orchestrate content in a more reactive way rather than just a proactive way. I mean, could you give us the basic of rules that kind of make that content surface rather than, what do you need to do? How do you need to engineer your content and plan your content so that it's the one that's going to get picked up?
Well, without being too prescriptive, because this changes depending on each model and the way they work. As you know, these models are effectively black boxes. So you can't see inside the model. You can only see what comes in and what comes out and try to create an abstracted representation of how it understands your specific topic, right? But obviously, there are a few very simple rules. You have to make your content discoverable to these AIs, right? You have to shape your content in a way that is adapted to the questions that are being asked. So maybe use more of a FAQ format rather than just putting out the raw data and expecting the AI to be able to remodel that into an answer to the specific questions. So I think it relies on making the content available and fashioning it in a way that actually answers the questions that are being asked by your patients and your physicians.
And can we say that the traditional ways in which people would optimize the chances that their content were to be picked up by originally search engine is still valid, but there is kind of another layer of rules on top of that? Would you say that the traditional experience, expertise, authoritative, and trustworthiness, the EEAT framework, still applies in our discussion today?
Very much so, very much so. But I think the important thing to understand today is that the information available to patients and HCPs isn't constrained by the sources available, okay? It is constrained by the questions that they ask, because the AI will always generate an answer. And so it's important for pharma teams to shift their thinking from a publishing cadence to a continuous measurement of what is being said by these AIs and correcting that information.
So can we say there's an iterative nature in the way you need to plan your content and have like a monthly review and then have an agile adjustment as to what the next month's content is going to be?
I would say even higher frequency than monthly. I would say continuous, because if you continuously prompt these models, you can see from day to day that the answers that they give can drift. And if you don't set up the monitoring, you'll never know, because these answers aren't published. They're generated inside the models.
So one of the challenges for pharma, as you know, is it takes quite a lot of time between the time you conceive a piece of content and the time it gets not only created, but also reviewed by MLR. So do you have any suggestions on how possibly the medical affairs or the product teams can adjust the way they do content production through perhaps more standardization, reliance on claims libraries and things like that, in order to be way more reactive and be able to churn out the answers that is needed or that plugs in a gap in the answer universe out there?
Well, Sabine, I'm purely focused on the measurement layer, right? So I'm happy that there are people like you that are very great at creating content, but I do think that inside the pharma teams, they need to change their operating models in order to be much more proactive in terms of continuously measuring the narrative that is being vehicled by these AIs about their products, and being able to proactively create content to be the most authoritative voice in their therapeutic area, let's say.
So in my experience, if I may share, essentially the way we can do very reactive and very kind of short turnover time content is by relying heavily on templates, relying heavily on claims libraries, And also potentially, if you want to generate a large volume of answers to the questions for which you're seeking to publish a greater level of clarity, you may rely on an AI tool to generate the first draft of your answers. But because pharma is highly regulated, there's always a need for an editor to have a look over. And in my opinion, this is the most optimum way of planning content in reaction to the audit that tools like yours may deliver on a continuous basis. It's really important that people understand that if you do not adjust the cadence of publication, as per your suggestion, Alexander, essentially misinformation will step in the gap, and that's not what we're trying to achieve. And potentially, there could be some fingers pointed at the fact that companies were not reactive enough. If misinformation got in the way, it means that the people responsible for publishing in their therapy area of choice might not have been quick off the mark enough. So that calls for an overhaul of the way medical information is published online, it seems.
Yeah, Sabine, I'm always careful of speculating about how the pharma companies are expected to operate, but it's clear that this is a major commercial risk for pharma companies and a patient risk, because AIs today, in the absence of available information, are simply fabricating claims about these therapies.
Okay, and this is where we see the danger, not only for patient, but also for a healthcare professional who are trying to keep up with the latest trends in innovation in treatment strategy and things like that. So essentially, maybe we can move on to the next question, which is about asking you your opinion as to why pharma content fails and how can you fix it? What's your recommendation on that front?
Yeah. So from my perspective, obviously, pharma content doesn't fail because it's bad or badly written. It's simply because it was designed it wasn't designed rather for this new channel, as you could say. It was built for very controlled channels where we knew exactly the format in which it was going to be represented. But today, we're looking at a totally new interface, right? Which is these AI chatbots and eventually agents that will be talking to each other and kind of having these conversations between them. And then when AI generated content starts feeding other AIs, that's when it gets quite complicated. And that's why we always need to have humans in the loop that ground it to actual evidence, because an AI doesn't understand the difference between a piece of text that is approved by a regulator and a piece of text that looks like it was approved by a regulator, right?
So there's a risk of self-fulfilling low-level content generation if you leave the machines to themselves, talk to each other, generate more content that doesn't make sense.
Yes. I mean, I think the recipe for disaster in this situation is keeping your eyes closed and not measuring what the AI is saying and just hope for the best.
Yeah, for sure. But don't you think that in a way, one of the major challenges for pharma is to avoid adding to the noise? Because as you may be aware, and you probably have noticed this on LinkedIn, you've probably noticed it online, the amount of AI-generated content, the sheer volume is growing every day because people can do it. They generate that content. It doesn't mean that it's going to be the one that gets picked up. So how would you say is the best way to try and stand out in this highly noisy environment?
As I said, I think it's obviously pharma are the ones sitting on the actual data. Everything else is downstream interpretation, anecdotes, etc. But then it relies on pharma to actually make that content available the end user, and this end user might today be an AI that then passes it on to the final consumer.
But does Pharma not have a competitive advantage in that they are sitting on authoritative content that's been authored by clinicians, for instance? If we take the example of phase 3 clinical trials that may be published, isn't there an opportunity to jump in the gap for that sort of fresh authoritative content and to create derivatives that can then be written in a particular way that answered the question that your average healthcare professional might ask, or even your average patient?
Totally. I think that sounds like a good recipe.
Okay, so I think we're going to try and see if we have questions from the audience. We have a few people in the chat room. So have we got a first question here? So how do I increase the AI visibility of my unbranded content? Would be the first question.
Yes. Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, if you have.
Sure. So I think the first one, the question kind of entails some type of measurement, right? So the first step is setting up the measurement to understand, okay, what is my visibility today? And then be able to continuously iterate on the content that is made and measure its impact on AI visibility. So I think
you mentioned previously that that measurement may be a one-off measure for the day that you took the measure. Would you say that there's a need to measure several times at regular intervals to get the big picture of what's the average answer that those chatbots might produce? Do you need a certain critical mass of answers in order to get a good view as to what most people would get?
Yes. So this is a bit of a technical question, but I can cover it briefly. So what you need to understand about these models is that they're probabilistic models. So you can ask the exact same question. Let's say you open your computer right now, I open mine, and we ask the exact same question to ChatGPT. We'll get two different answers because they're probabilistic models. But the same way you can understand how a die is loaded by throwing it 10,000 times, you can ask the same question to an AI a very large amount of times and get a distribution of answers.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
That's the way you get the closest answer to what your average user will get. You cannot just do a one-off diagnostics. You have to continuously keep asking.
Yeah, to put it simply, they're statistical systems, so you need statistical methods to measure them.
Okay, fair enough. So have we got another question from the audience? The forever dreaded question as to whether AI is going to take our jobs. So in particular, because we're talking about pharma medical content, would you believe that AI on its own can generate chatbot ready content that's sufficient quality for pharma to pick up, to rely on it without anyone's intervention? I think we've touched upon it earlier in the discussion.
So my response here is quite clear. It can generate the content, but it cannot approve it because an AI is a purely statistical language model. It does not understand the hierarchy of evidence. So it does not understand the difference between a response that sounds plausible and a response that's actually supported by scientific evidence. So that's it's an AI can never approve medical information.
So you can't remove the responsibility of the person publishing the content, essentially, of the organization publishing the information. I think we're getting to the end of our conversation. I'd like to thank you, Alexander, for sharing your wisdom on the topic, because I have noticed, particularly on my LinkedIn feed, that whenever I touch upon this subject of GEO, as it's known in the jargon, very few people actually react to it. And I'm always surprised to see that when you are in a position as a medical affairs manager or a marketing manager or product manager, these sort of things should kind of start to worry you, because if you don't address these issues now, there's a risk that someone else will, and that someone else might not be the person that has an authoritative answer to the question. We've got another question coming through. So the question about segmentation and segmented content. So I don't know if you have views on that, Alexander.
I'm not sure exactly what they mean by segmented content.
I suppose, if I interpret well, is what they mean is how do you differentiate the different kind of content you need to create in order to address different kind of audiences in your audiences, and to what extent do you need to, maybe technically or purely from the way you formulate the content, to what extent do you need to create that content to be fit for purpose for different type of audience segments?
Okay, that makes sense. So I think the concept of share of question is really powerful here, to kind of understand that the important part now is not to saturate different channels to be the most visible on Facebook or on WhatsApp or whatever. It's to be visible on these AI models, you need to have the answer to the question that is being prompted on these AI models. And so kind of work backwards from there. Understand what questions the patients are asking the chatbots, and make sure you create the content so that when the AI goes out crawling on the internet, it finds the question and a simple answer to that question, and bases its response on your content.
Okay, well, I hope this answered the question. So I'd like to close this discussion by thanking all of our audience to be here live with us today. And I'd like to also invite all of you to take part in the next edition of our Pharma Decrypted webinar series. So we will have our guest speaker, Madeleine Borksval, on the 29th of April, and it will be widely promoted through LinkedIn and other channels. So thank you again, Alexander. This was a very insightful discussion.
Thank you so much for having me, Sabine. It's always a pleasure.